In this lesson, I'm going to explain how to do some basic animation in 3D space, plus do something called multiplaning. And multiplaning is when you have a number of objects in varying distances in Z space, some objects apparently closer to the viewer and some much farther away. And then you dolly or truck or pan across the front of those objects left to right, right to left, and the ones relatively close to the camera seem to move more compared to the objects farther away. So I'm going to show you multiplaning and basic animation here in this lesson. To follow along, go to Working Files, After Effects Projects, and open up 1702 3D Animation. We are going to work only in this first comp. This other comp is one where I've set up an entire example with an animation that you can follow along and see how it works. And this third one is that whole thing set up again, and if you want to work on it and set up your own animation inside there, you may. But we're going to go back to comp 1 here. Well, we have here a couple of boys in this little forest. Let me show you how this is set up. And the way that you can see how it's set up is by going to the custom view. So go over here and go down to custom view, pick any one you want. And then you need to use a camera, so you can press C for the camera or click on the camera tool up here. And now kind of pan around a little bit. And you can see what we have here. We have those trees on this green floor and the sky off in the distance. The green floor is just a green solid that I rotated on the x-axis. And the sky is something I made up using a number of clouds and a blue backdrop that I pre-comped and put in here for the sky. And it's way, way off in the distance. So we've got some trees here up close, and then the green goes off in the distance and the sky is way, way back. And we want to have these boys walk through these trees, and while they do that, we want to pan across the trees, and the trees that are close to us will look like they're moving more than the trees farther away, as it should be when you are panning across something like this that has a 3D feel to it. Let's go back to the standard view, the active camera. This is what people see. The first thing you should do is do that panning, so then you can see how the boys will relate to the trees afterwards. So the way you set that up is by adding a null object layer. So you can go up to Layer, New, Null Object. So we're going to parent everything to the null object layer except for the sky, and then we're going to animate across. We're going to pan right to left using just the null object layer. So to set up everything like that, I've already got the parent column open. I'm just going to click on this first layer here and then shift-click on the last one. Then I just need to drag one pick whip from the parent over here, the parent column, to the null object layer, and there we go. Now we've connected them all except for the sky. The sky is just going to sit back there and not move at all because it's so far back it really wouldn't be part of any multiplaning. I'm going to press F2 to deselect everybody. I'm going to click on the null object layer, and I'm going to look for that little XYZ thing so I can pan across, but there is no XYZ thing because it isn't 3D yet. You need to turn on 3D for it. And now it's ready to go. I want to pan across, so I'm going to hover over here till I see the X turn up. I'm going to just kind of pan across here and see how things look like that. So I want to pan from, let's say, the edge of our little world there, and then pan to the right like this. I'm actually moving the camera left, but moving everybody else to the right there, like that. So we'll just pan across there to that point. So we'll start over here. You can see how the trees all work with each other because the ones farther away move less than the ones close up. So I'm going to turn on keyframes for position. So I just press the P key for the null object layer. Turn on keyframes for position. We'll go over here to the end, and we'll just slide it over until we get just to the edge there. And then just about to fall off our little earth here. There you go. And let's see how that looks. I can take this first keyframe to the beginning, make it to the full length now. There you go. So now we pan across here. You'll see that the trees in front have more apparent motion than the trees in the back, those little guys back there. And the sky doesn't have any apparent motion at all. That's multiplaning on a very basic level. If you go to this next example over here, which is much more elaborate, you'll see that there are trees farther away and there's mountains off in the distance there. So there's a little bit more of that kind of multiplaning going on here. All right, let's go back to this first one. Now I want to animate the two boys. I'll have this first one come from off in the distance, and then we'll have them come toward the camera, and the other one walk kind of across, perhaps in front of them. So let's just set that first boy back a little way. So I've got the runner and the walking dog. So the runner, obviously, is this young man. We're going to put him back in Z space a little bit. So let me open up his position by pressing P. I also want to open up scale, so Shift S, because even though we're pushing him back and he'll get smaller, it's kind of good to make him even smaller as he goes farther away, just to have a greater perception of distance. So what I want to do is I want to push him back in Z space, and the greater the number, the larger the Z number, the farther away he is from our view. So I'm going to back him up by pressing this over here and dragging it back. Then go back, let's say, a long ways there. And now we're going to shrink him down a little bit, something less than 20%. There you go. Now he's pretty small. We can keyframe both of those things like that. And then go forward in time a bit. We're going to go kind of away from him now. We'll have him move to the left now a little bit. Oops, I got the tree instead. We'll click on the boy instead here. Sometimes it's tricky to get these guys. There we go. Now we got it. And I can bring him forward in Z space by making his number smaller for Z. Holding down the Shift key as I bring him forward here a little bit. And we'll just leave it at that for the time being, and maybe bring up the scale a bit now too. More like 20%. There we go. Go a little bit farther here to the end. Have him kind of come over to the left with us. We'll just keep on dragging him over to the left, like so. Let's see if he goes behind the tree. We'll watch this. As he goes there, does he go behind the tree? There he goes, behind the tree there, like that. And continues over to the left. Maybe we can send him back just a little bit here. We'll just make a larger number here and send him back. Also maybe make him a little bit smaller there. So it's all kind of scales properly. There we go. All right, let's just see how that animates now. I'll just kind of drag through there as we do this. Here he comes forward. Goes around like that. He's going in front of the other boy. Goes in front of this tree and behind the one closer to us. All relative to those trees' positions. If I go down and select all the trees, just click on the first one and shift click on the last one, press P. You can look at their Z position here, how they are large for the ones that are farther away, and then negative for the ones that are close to the camera. And then the boy is somewhere in between those guys. All right, let's just go back here. Let's have the boy with the dog now do something similar. We want him to walk basically right to left. So let's go back here, because that's kind of where he's facing. We'll click on the walking dog and press P. Probably don't have to work with scale too much, but we'll press S just in case. We're going to take him off to the right. Figure he's just kind of walking across the scene here. So we'll start there. Turn on keyframes for that starting point. Like this. Let's just see how he relates to this little young man here as he's running. We'll bring this guy to the left now. See where he is relative to the boy. Goes right behind him. So we want to make sure that they don't crash into each other, right? So we'll have him go past him before he gets there. Let's see how that works. Gets there, he's behind him, and then he catches up and goes in front of him. And continues on his way. And we'll have the boy walking the dog a little bit farther here. Goes behind that tree. Probably should make him a little bit smaller when he goes behind the tree just to give that perception that he's gone someplace. So we'll go back here and set the keyframe for scale to be the same as the one before by pressing the diamond. And then as he goes behind the tree, we'll shrink him down a little bit here. Just to give him a little perception of having gotten a little bit smaller there. We want to make sure he doesn't get tangled up in the roots. And go on to the end like this. Then we'll bring him to the left and maybe bring him forward a little bit here. Let's bring him up toward us by changing the Z value, making it smaller and bringing him forward a little bit, like so. Maybe scaling him up just a little bit there because he brought him up closer. Okay, let's see how that animates out then. What I'm going to do now is I'll just do a little RAM preview, then I'll get back to you in a second when it's done. Let's check that out and see how that looks. There you go. Like so. He walks in front of them, goes back. Very good. If we were to maintain the sort of realism of the boy running forward, we could have brought him farther toward the camera, but nevertheless, that looks pretty good. Now, the one other thing you can do when you're doing something like this is to create drop shadows. You can do drop shadows for every object in the scene here. Let's just do it for one of the boys here so you get a sense of how that works. So I'm going to do it for the runner. The way you do a drop shadow is that you just add another layer and put a drop shadow on that layer and then just have it be a shadow only. So I'm going to take the runner. I'm going to duplicate the runner by doing Control or Command D. It adds another instance of the runner there on top of the current runner. I want to just rearrange things, not that it's so critical, but I want to make sure the runner I'm working on here is the one that's underneath the one in front because the shadow should be behind him. I'm going to drop a drop shadow on this one behind there. So I'm going to go over here and type in drop shadow and drop it on the runner beneath the first one. I'm going to turn off the top one for the time being. And I want to be able to see the drop shadow only. So I click on shadow only. Now we just see this black shadow. I'm going to zoom in a bit so you get a better look at it by doing Control or Command plus. There we go. And that shadow will be just covered up by the boy in front, which really doesn't do us any good. But I want to be able to have it sort of drop off to one side. And the way you do that is with the corner pin effect. So go corner pin and apply that to that layer as well. What you can do now is pull the shadow down a little bit, like so. There you go. Spread it out a bit. And shadow's usually not that distinct, so we're going to soften it up a bit by just taking the softness, I'd say way up. You can go to 200 or something like that. There you go. If you want to drop the opacity a little bit, you can knock it down just a little bit, make it less obvious. Now we want to see if they're looking connected. Lots of times when the shadows are like this, they tend to be just a little bit too low. So you can fix that by adjusting the anchor point. I don't want to change the position because the position keyframes are already set. So I'm going to go Shift A for the anchor point. I want to just lift them up a little bit. So I'm going to use the Y value here and take the Y value so it goes up just a touch like that. And that way it should now stick with you. Let's go Shift / Let's see how that works. Pretty good. Notice how the shadow falls on other objects, including the trees as he goes by. It looks pretty cool. Shadow might be a little too distinct here, a little too dark, but I think you get the message as to how to do this. You can apply the shadow to the boy with the dog as well if you care to do that in this exercise. But let's move forward to the big exercise. This is what I did just to demonstrate how this works. Here's the whole thing with a different kind of a landscape to it. And the trees are moving along in that kind of multiplaning you'd expect. And we've got the two kids going through the scene like that and interacting with each other and having drop shadows. And you notice that these trees are pretty much stuck in place back there. When you can see the base and you're doing this multiplaning, they usually don't get stuck in place. So I'm going to press the U key to show you all the keyframes. And you see that some trees have keyframes. The trees that have keyframes would have slid along the landscape as they did this multiplaning. If you can see the roots, they'll usually be sliding along because this ground here is not flat. This ground is not something they're resting on as if it goes off in the distance. This ground is standing straight up. If I go over here and take a look at the custom view, see the ground is vertical, not horizontal. So when you put a tree on it, you're not really putting a tree on it, you're putting a tree in front of it. So as you do the multiplaning, it looks like the tree is sliding across the ground. I'm going to go back to the active camera view. So to keep that from happening, you need to keyframe the trees. And so this tree, for example, is keyframed there, as are these trees back there. And they just compensate for the motion. It's easy to keyframe. You just put a keyframe at the beginning, and then when you're done panning across like this, just slide them over to where you need them, and they'll then fall into place, and we'll just move along as if they're attached to the ground. So if you want to try this little project out, I've got it all set up over here. I've not keyframed the trees because you can't do that until you add the null object layer and animate that. I've not added drop shadows here or animated the boys because you really don't want to animate them until after you animate the null object layer. But here it's all set up and ready for you to go. So that's how you do multiplaning and basic 3D animation here in After Effects.